Alright, so Netflix put out a couple of things this weekend, so I figure those will be the two that we go into for the time being. And I want to start two very different things, by the way, to say the least. So why don't we start with Extraction? And this is one of those movies I was going into where they were starting to get quite a bit of hype around it, like in the couple of days before it was actually put out. And it seemed like people were going pretty crazy for it, saying it was like this really hardcore action movie. It was like non-stop. It was just 2 hours of Chris Hemsworth killing people, stuff like that. It's written by Joe Russo of the Russo brothers, who he adapted it. And the director is a first-time director, but he is a stunt coordinator on, when you look at his resume, just about everything, it seems, but most notably he's Chris Evans' stunt double for the Captain America movies, which is feels like a good thing because the stunt work, especially in the Captain America movies, feel like really, the fight scenes feel like really real and really brutal, even for the kind of movies that they are. So that was extremely promising going in, and obviously, if there's any problems with this movie, the fight scenes are not part of the problem at all. That they're definitely like the main selling point and the main reason to check this out. But I did find myself having some issues going in that made themselves apparent pretty early. But that's not to say we'll just get into it. It's first off, it's one of those movies that is apparently terrified that it's going to bore its audience if it isn't, you know, action every 2 minutes, and like really in your face a lot of the time. So it's going to be one of those movies that decides to start at the end, so that we can just immediately start with, you know, action and gunfire and fighting and bloodshed and all that other stuff, and then we're going to start the story. Which sometimes can be effective, but other times, especially lately, like the more you see it, the more it feels like it's almost like a movie terrified of its audience. Like it's terrified to just play out as it plays out, rather than trying to say, well, let's give them what they want immediately, and then go from there. It feels like there's a lack of confidence at the start of the movie when they do stuff like that, at least. Like I said, it depends on the movie, I guess, but yeah, and then going into that, when I was watching it about halfway through, it started to occur to me, like, if somebody were to ask me what this movie is, if they had never even heard of it, what I would probably say is it's basically a Rambo movie for Chris Hemsworth, is pretty much what it is. Like, even like story-wise and the way the action is and everything. But, that's kind of the problem. Like, that's kind of the movie's main problem, is that I feel like it's in, and you can see it around when you look at discussion and, you know, comments that people are making on it or whatever, or reviews, is that it's one of those movies that's impossible to talk about without referring to, like, 10 other different movies, where you say, oh, this portion reminds me of this, or this portion reminds me of this, and by the time you get to the end, there's not really anything that's its own thing. It's always like, and I don't want to seem like when I go against this movie, and for the reason that people love this movie is not for, you know, the story or the characters or anything like that. It's the action and the way the action is executed. And to go against this movie would probably make it sound like that's not really my thing, but obviously if you're familiar with the stuff we talked about in the past, just in a video a couple of months ago, I mentioned that The Raid 2 is top 5 of this past decade for me, and I feel like I was one of the first people on the John Wick bandwagon back in 2014, and we see where that is now, and I'm still a huge fan of that. And there's also a movie that I was reminded a lot of, that not many people took to it, but I really did for some reason, and that's No Escape, with Owen Wilson and Pierce Brosnan. And there's, as far as the action feels more or less non-stop, and they have to protect kids in the process, was giving me a lot of vibes of that movie also. And that kind of stuff is great, and you can see there'll be action scenes where you say, like, oh, this reminds me of The Raid, or oh, this reminds me of John Wick. John Wick, especially when it comes to, like, the resourcefulness of some of the surroundings that he uses. But then there's also stuff. Another movie that the director was a stunt coordinator on was Atomic Blonde. And I was not a fan of Atomic Blonde at all. So, and a lot of the problems I had with Atomic Blonde are stuff that I find in this movie too. Like we were talking about the action and how hardcore it is, and that works. Like the hand-to-hand fight scenes and all that stuff. The way they're shot is especially important, and the editing and all that, because that's usually the death of these movies that try to be non-stop action movies, is they're just cut to shit, and you can't tell what's going on, and they're horribly, terribly executed. And it looks like a bunch of stunt doubles cutting back and forth with each other, whereas here you can actually see Chris Hemsworth, throwing some dude against the wall, or shoving a dude's head into a rake, or something like that. And of course his character's name is Rake, and so it's like this, that kind of thing you would expect there would be some sort of tongue-in-cheek thing throughout the movie, but no, that's pretty much the only thing in the movie like that. So that's unfortunate, but and maybe it would have benefited more from that. I don't know. Like it would have maybe made it more like I don't know, but. But there was something that kind of was missing from this movie to where it didn't feel like there was a balance of things. It kind of felt like it was just going down one street, and then that can only go for so long before it's tiresome, no matter how well executed it is. Because talking about Atomic Blonde and the things I hated about it, there is one particular scene in this movie that is getting all the hype, and I can't say that I am there with this hype, because I've been saying a lot. We go back and forth on if the one-take thing is a great tool to make a scene really stand out, or is it like way overused and way overdone and losing its luster the more people try their hand at it. Especially when we're getting like full movies trying to do it. Everything from like Russian Ark from the 90s to 1917 last year, and Birdman in between. And there are times where it still can really just work in this incredible way by doing the immersive thing. But then there's times like the flat-out parody of it in Atomic Blonde that was just so goddamn ridiculous in how much they tried to pack into it at once. It wasn't an immersive thing. It wasn't to show off the scene in like this really cinematic way. It felt like it was, let's see how much we can pack into this, and it's like they're trying to draw as much attention to it as possible, which is the opposite of what you want to do with that kind of thing. And it's like it was choreographed by people who were desperate to get credit for doing it, rather than make it this invisible thing that makes the scene better. And it's like, because it starts off as a car chase, and then they're here, and then they're there, and you can see all the trickery. You can see all the fake shit that's making this happen. You can see the cuts from a mile away, the green screen from a mile away, when it's Hemsworth, when it's not, and when you have to do stuff like that, after a while, just what's the point? Like, if you have to fake it that much, why even try that style? It makes no sense to me, and that's pretty much the way it went. With this, and like Atomic Blonde is kind of what put me off. The one-take action scene is no longer cool, at least for a while. Somebody's gonna have to bring it back in a really big way, because Atomic Blonde just completely, like, the dead horse was beaten until there was nothing left by the time Atomic Blonde was over. That scene in it was over. So there's that. There's actually, and I don't know how controversial this will sound, because this is a movie that wasn't exactly well-liked, and I didn't like it either, but there is a scene in the rhythm section, the movie that came out earlier this year with Blake Lively, that does this scene so much better. It's like, and they didn't try to overblow it, it's like all within the confines of the car, and it is so much better done than this. So there's that. So, but there are still some shots in it that aren't action-related that work also. Like there's one, they're here and there. It's not like it's like not, like, apart from the fight scenes themselves, which are well shot and well put together, there are other things like the scene towards the beginning, when we're looking at Hemsworth sitting on a porch through a doorway as a helicopter is taking off. And it's like, shots like that are really cool. Feel like kind of old-fashioned too, like The Searchers sort of thing. which is really nice. But that's about as far as you can take that. And then you have, you know, as far as that scene goes, and as far as it reaching like emotional beats, it is one of those cases where the less because you can do character without having to like really go into it. You can do character in subtle ways, which is the best way to go in movies like this that are predominantly action and are trying to have a feel of like being nonstop. Because it is one of those movies where people will tell you it's nonstop 2 hours of Chris Hemsworth killing people, which, as usual, is an extreme exaggeration. It's an action movie, but it's definitely not like what you would expect when you think that. So we do have this moment that feels really real, and it shows the presence that Hemsworth can have, where it's she's basically reading him, like she's sitting across from him, and it's like she knows he's at rock bottom, and she's basically telling him this. And he doesn't say anything, he doesn't give her some, you know, tragic backstory, he just, like, smiles. But you can see the smile is, like, there's, like, pain in it, and you can, like, see, like, everything that's made him come to this point just through his smile and how much it seems to be hiding. Or even maybe just flat out showing, depending on how you look at it. Hemsworth was able to make his face a Rorschach test in this moment, which really takes talent to do. And stuff like that is what really works. What doesn't really work, for me anyway, is when we're doing this whole thing of the tragic backstory eventually comes, like in between action scenes. And yes, you can see a writer saying, this is how structure works. We do all the action, we do non-stop action, and then we eventually have to get to a stopping point where we take breathing room so the audience doesn't get tired, and we do the character development so that we feel for them and the stakes feel higher because we know more about them, etc. It's screenwriting 101, which unfortunately is what it feels like when those scenes come in. It doesn't feel like this really sincere moment of, oh, we're getting, this is how he got here, and this is why he makes the decisions he does, this is why he feels like he has nothing to lose. It's just, this is the part in the script where this happens, and we play sad music, and he sheds the one tear, and he tells us the story that they've been not so subtly building to, and it feels like it's just one of those cases of this is the part where we have this script requirement that needs to be in here. And so there doesn't really feel like any natural feeling coming out of it. And then we jump right back into the action, and so on. So there's that, but as far as also, like, they do some good stuff as far as, like, distinguishing who is a villain, and sometimes they kind of go in between. Which does work. You gotta make the bad guys identifiable. So we have this scene they're on a rooftop and they're interrogating a group of kids. And what happens during this interrogation and the way they do it establishes pretty well in one scene. It reminds me of, like, the execution scene at the beginning of the raid. And you're like, yep, this is the bad guy, and that's all we need to know. That's all you needed to tell us to let us know who this guy is, and how big of a threat he may or may not be. So, but then you've got this middle ground, where another guy is sent out to retrieve the kid that Hemsworth is protecting. And this guy is interesting because he's the sort of bad guy you expect, where we have to have... He's not the main villain, but he's the villain sent by the main villain that is the hero's equal. There's always that guy in these movies. And what they do with this is something I would normally hate in another movie, because there's a certain turn with this character. But I think the reason I don't hate that turn here is because it's established early. Like, it's established in, like, the second scene that we have with this guy, pretty much. And so, the thing about that is, in another movie, it would be like, this guy's a bad guy, and that's all he is. And, you know, he does all this, he's the equal to the hero, all this, and then, like, at the end, there would suddenly be the turn. And luckily, this movie doesn't do that. The turn is set up very early, and then as it goes on, it becomes more of actual thing. Something that I imagine the movies that do it the other way are trying to pull off, but they can't. So because this, to the movie's credit, it's not really much going for the surprise factor in a lot of cases. You can pinpoint what's going to happen around just about every corner, especially since they start at the fucking end. But but besides that, there is like it feels like it knows that you know what's around every corner, and it's not trying to necessarily go beyond that. So there is something there, but I do wish there was a bit more of a kind of, I don't know if I want to say self-awareness, because that's a dangerous territory that you gotta, that's like a tightrope that you and you could really fuck that up if you try to do that too much. But like I said, if there was some sort of balance, like I was talking about, the fact that we have a character named Rake that kills a dude with a rake, and nobody mentions that, which is even better. And it's like, that makes you, just that scene alone, that scene's existence, that moment's existence makes you realize, I feel like there needs to be like another side to this, rather than it just feeling like this one particular thing, this one particular emotion that the movie has. I think that's what it is. It's just the one sort of emotion that this movie has, which is just totally straight-faced and bloodshed. But it doesn't have, like, the... I almost think there's not enough over-the-top factor that you would see in, like, one of Stallone's later Rambo movies. So maybe that... And yeah, there will be some people that watch this that say, like, how could you possibly go more over the top? You definitely could. And so... And I don't... That could be... It could be unfair. It could be the hype. That might make this feel lackluster when you're expecting something a bit more, I guess, insane would be the word I'm looking for. I don't know. But there's, in every now and then, it's not particularly suspenseful because it is just Hemsworth killing people, but the way they got kind of balance that a little bit is that he doesn't always feel like unstoppable. Like, he takes a beating throughout. He bleeds a lot. He's like John McClane levels of bleeding in many cases. And you can actually see him injured and like have to stop for a second, which is a breath of fresh air in movies like this, where you typically have the unstoppable sort of thing. So there is that. And then really late into the movie, David Harbour comes in, and it's more or less, you know, nice. Once again, it's something you can see coming from a mile away, but it's like, the thing I liked about the David Harbour scenes are that they're just kind of in their own area in the middle of the movie, and they almost feel like they could be their own standalone sequence around them. Like, you don't necessarily have to know the background of what's going on in the rest of the movie for these moments to, like, pretty much stand on their own as, like, a whole sequence in itself. So stuff like that is fine, but yeah, so I mean, I get why people are really into it, and I think obviously it's the action scenes and how well done they are, from obviously a very experienced and extremely talented stunt coordinator directing it, but it's way bogged down by feeling like more of the same, and just like everything in it feels like it can equate to something else that we've already seen, that's already been done. And it's... So for me, pretty much anytime there was any action scene, no matter how well done it was, about halfway through the scene I was done with it. And like I said, that's coming from somebody that considers the Raid 2 top 5 of this past decade. And that movie is 2.5 hours and hardly ever stopped. And I never get sick of it. And that's... Yeah, so this one just kind of felt a bit tired given the stuff that we've seen up to this point, but I can see where people get a kick out of it, so there's that. So let's go on to the Willoughbys, which I don't have a whole lot to say about, because like I guess I'm still in that weird place with animated movies where there's the classic animated movies can still get me like anytime I watch them, and for some reason the new ones I just kind of have an emotional disconnect. No matter how much I can realize that this movie is, like, objectively well made. Like, nobody can say that this movie is not well made. It's very funny. The animation looks really good, especially the stuff in, like the candy factory, where, like, the colors are just, like, bursting out and all that. The characters are really fun. There's so much to like in this. And then, of course, at the end of the day, its message is really nice also. But there were things that I feel like I should have been feeling when those moments hit, and I wasn't quite getting there. But to start off, going to the very beginning, we have a narrator who is a cynical cat, who is voiced by Ricky Gervais, because of course he is. He's narrating like to us, like he's looking at the camera into us, but he's also like just hanging around in the scene. Sometimes you can see him like in the background in various places, which is a good concept. And of course you've got Ricky Gervais, who is, of course, Ricky Gervais will play a cynical cat. And it's like whenever he's narrating, it basically sounds like he is narrating straight from the podium at the Golden Globes. Like the inflection, the delivery, everything is just exactly that. And I don't know if that's a fault or not. And there's actually, I meant to look this up because I feel like it has to be the case, and I really hope it is. Whenever this cat meows occasionally, and usually when that's the case, like you have an actor voicing an animal, but then the animal makes an animal sound. Usually it's just a recording of that animal sound, or maybe a voice actor doing that animal sound. Those meows sound like Ricky Gervais. I really hope it's him making the noises too. I hope he went all in, because that would definitely be a plus to this. But then going on, we have the introduction, and what I really like about the introduction is the parent characters, mother and father, whose names are mother and father, despite the fact that the last thing they want to be are a mother and father. And they are, I think Jane Krakowski is mother, and Martin Short is definitely father. And so this opening scene is really funny when we hear the protagonist being born, and then Martin Short brings him out into the hallway as a baby, having just come from his mother's womb, and drops him in the hallway and says the words, that sweet woman you insulted with your rude birth is your mother. And just so you know, we have no interest in loving you. So you'll live in this house, but we're not gonna feed you or do anything like that. You're gonna stay in like the room of like coal in the basement, and that's how you're gonna live. Goodbye. Like all of the kids are Cinderella, and and the parents just live their own lives, hopelessly in love with each other. Like they would be the most romantic couple of all time if we didn't know how they treated their kids. And the way they take this approach, where these would be the moments in another movie where it's really sad and the parents are built up as these ultimate evil people, and they are. And the movie treats them that way. But it feels so refreshing that they're made to be funny while they're doing that. It's like that's a really unexpected way to take the cliche of like the mean parents and the neglectful parents. And it's also a nice divergence of like having the parents that suffer like the Disney fate. And it's so to have them actually, they're both here, they're both pieces of shit, and it's hilarious every time they are, no matter how sad that is for the main characters, the characters we actually care about. And the way they find that balance is really well done. And I would say, and then of course they introduce a nanny character with Maya Rudolph, and then the candy dude that is like, he's basically Captain Crunch, but he's Captain Crunch, but he's basically also Willy Wonka. And they throw in these characters, but the thing about it is, even though the movie is consistently funny, and it's energetic, and it's got all the stuff it wants to do, and the way it treats its characters feels very new and fresh and all that, I think the problem with the movie is that it's so much more clever than its story and its structure are. Because, take for instance like the Hotel Transylvania movies, where when you watch those, especially like the first one, how there is so much going on in those movies, and it's like there's so much detail, and like there are like background jokes everywhere. You have to watch that movie like 15 times to get all of the jokes, because there'll be some that just go right by really quickly, or they were just hanging out in the background and you didn't see them. And there's something so clever about that and the way they handled that. Because the thing about animated movies, a majority of them, is that they're just kind of treated as throwaway movies. And not just by audiences, by the people that make them. Like, the people that make them know, like, oh, this is just made to entertain children, so we're not going to try very hard. We'll get the celebrity voices, we'll throw in a couple of colorful backgrounds, and then everything else will just jump around to distract kids for a while, because that's all animated movies do. So the way you can take, like, what Hotel Transylvania does and make everything colorful and bounce around, but also be focused and, like, be clever about it, I feel like this kind of falls in the middle of that, where the clever factor is absolutely in this movie, but what's going on in it jumps around so much, where it's like every 5 or 10 minutes there's something. It feels like we've jumped to an entirely different story, and I can see where there might be an appeal to that. Like, the episodic feel is what it's doing, and it just feels like really all over the place. And because of this, to me it felt really long, and it's only an hour and a half. Like, this is something that should not feel long at all, but the way it just jumped around everywhere every 5 or 10 minutes becomes so tiresome so fast, that it kind of drags the good portions of the movie down with it and makes them seem less like lesser movies before them, that they actually are more clever and witty than. And so that kind of sucks. And then it also gets to, like... And then, well, there's also stuff I was talking about, like, the rake thing and Extraction, where it's like, the best jokes like that are the jokes that seem really blatantly obvious, but nobody specifically calls them out. Like, the fact that there's an abandoned baby at their doorstep that they want to take care of, but the parents make them get rid of, and they decide to name the baby Ruth, and it ends up being a candy factory that they drop her off. And so it's like, you say in your head, Candy, Baby Ruth, I get it. But the fact that this is never addressed, they never call her Baby Ruth, they take a joke that is so blatantly obvious and easy, and it's made clever because nobody flat out says it. And it's like, it's that easy to do a joke like that. But just so many movies feel like everybody's an idiot and have to blatantly say what their joke is. And there's a few of those in this, where there's like visual gags everywhere that don't get attention called to them. And that kind of stuff is really appreciated. But like I said, just the way it's just all over the damn place, makes it feel like it's falling into the traps of the movies that it is objectively better than, and it falls into this middle ground territory that I feel like it shouldn't belong in, but I think that's what kind of took away from it a lot, especially when it gets to the emotional moments I was talking about that weren't quite resonating. Especially when you get to a moment, there's an emotional moment towards the end where it's like, it almost, like, it would be one of those things where you say, oh my god, on an emotional factor, I can't believe a movie like this went there. But the trouble is Pixar has had us saying that for so many years now. And it feels like the well is kind of run dry, especially since that moment in this movie feels quite reminiscent to a particular scene in Toy Story 3. So it's like, it's still admirable that when they don't, try to hold back or whatever, but, like, it's a hard place to do it, because I don't want it to sound like, because Pixar has reached all the emotional peaks, don't even try. But I think it has to do with the scene being so reminiscent of a particular scene before that, like I said, we're falling into pretty much the same territory as Extraction. You want to admire its execution, and I do, and like I said, it's very, something important. I keep sort of, jumping over here, but it is very, very important. The fact that it's actually funny is a major factor in its success, for sure. But yeah, there's still a lot of it that feels like kind of been their territory, despite how fresh a lot of it feels. It's a weird territory to be in. I don't know. Maybe I'm probably gonna feel like I'm being too harsh on it once more time has passed, and maybe I'll see it again at some point. But for now, it's yeah. I feel like it kind of falls into this middle ground where its structure kind of downplays what's really good about it. So that's about all I really have. So I have no idea what the next sort of reviews are going to be, but we are going to do a King thing is going to be right after this, and then probably another Versus, and then the same stuff we've been playing around with we'll keep doing. So until all that stuff, I think that's it.